know maybe, to have this panel with you on this very important issue that we worked a lot together with some people here on the financing for the African continent and especially for the energy transition. We already had some discussion, I remember, with Leanne, maybe two months ago, when we had our virtual summit we were supposed to be in Dakar, but we were in Paris, but some of you have already discussed of that, but it's a very important issue. We are working in climate change since now 6 or 7 years in Africa on this issue with UCLG, with a lot of people, and also with the financial actors like the African Bank of and the World Bank. And we try now to have this discussion. And to start, I think we will ask to Lion Shalatek, that's, sorry, Lion, to make us a survey of what are the main issue about it. And maybe the most important is to ask you what are the real possibility, or what are the things we can ask for here, because we know that the financial issue is the most important, especially for Africa. So, Leanne, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me again. My name is Liane Schalatek. I'm with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. The Heinrich Böll Foundation in the Washington office, where I'm from, has been involved for more than 10 years in tracking dedicated multilateral climate funds and climate funds flows via an initiative called the Climate Funds Update. And I will share some of the findings from that. This is obviously a subset of overall climate finance, but it's an important one. Our office is also very active in engaging, particularly with the Green Climate Fund, where I've also been a representative for civil society on the board of the Green Climate Fund and following the board proceedings in the Green Climate Fund for a while. So I was asked here, Bernard and colleagues, to give an overview over the climate finance, and if we could have the presentation, over the climate finance flows, what is provided to Africa, some figures and some trends. And some of it might be familiar to people, and particularly ones that might have attended the event 2 months ago, because it recycles very much so in the spirit of climate change, some of the numbers that have been provided there, but it's also been updated, and I hope this gives a good background for the discussion and finding out what is actually happening with finance provision, which is, as Bernard said, the corollary for increasing the ambition for the kind of financing that we need to, for the kind of actions that we need to see in the African continent. So first, let me say that it's really difficult to get a clear and accurate picture how much climate finance is provided overall. We have here at the discourse at the COP some of those discourses about the definitional issue, the self-categorization that the OECD countries have for their climate finance, issues of transparency, accuracy, comparability of data collections. There are very many actors that actually collect data. They use different methodologies. And then it's very, very hard to get to a regional breakdown for quantity and quality, meaning looking at issues related to financial instruments, localization, the private sector role, domestic categorization. There are some overarching trends. A lot of it has been discussed here, namely the fact that the 100 billion goal has not been achieved, that we still have way too much money spent on mitigation or not for adaptation, which is obviously very crucial for the African context, where we have a lot of least developed countries, but also some of the greatest climate vulnerability of people and ecosystems. A lot of the climate finance that is provided overall, an increasingly large amount, is provided in the form of loans and not at grants. This is also a big problem, and that is particularly the case through the multilateral development banks that are providing a larger share for actually loans than for grants. And for example, MDBs are providing only 9% of their financing for adaptation in the form of grants. So what does financing for Africa look like? When you look at some of the OECD figures and numbers that have come out, Africa as a region received an annual average of 25% or around 17 billion. This is significantly less than Asia, but more than the other regions in the world. But how does that compare with needs? And you see here in the box some of the numbers that have been put together on the needs. By some estimates, Africa could need 7 to 15 billion per year just to enhance adaptation, a full 3 trillion to fully implement NDCs. I also want to point out, also because it's such a important topic here at the COP in Glasgow, that we have also an increased need for loss and damage finance. So if you then, let me just go to the next slide. If you then look at the numbers on regional distribution overall, on those numbers are actually from the biannual assessment of the Standing Committee on Finance that was just released here at the COP. Then you see that there is quite a bit of difference in the provision of climate finance to Africa in terms of the financing instrument used, but also the focus on themes between bilateral flows across multilateral funds and MDBs. And as you can see also from the information that are provided there on the site, the most granularity of information provided is for multilateral climate funds. And I think it's very important, and this is one of the reasons why I'm going to focus particularly on the multilateral dedicated climate funds for Africa, because of the relevance for concessionality of finance provided, but also as the potential for non-state actors, particularly for civil society, indigenous peoples, women and local communities, since there is a public responsibility to provide funding equitably and just, not just among recipient countries, but within recipient countries, not just economic imperative, but a moral imperative, and to also include human rights and be gender responsive. So what you see here, this is the tracking effort via the Climate Funds update that I mentioned. The funds highlighted in green are the ones that are tracked by Climate Funds update, and with the remaining data provision, I will focus on that Climate Funds provision. So if you look at efforts through those dedicated multilateral funds, you can see some progression in cumulative funding received in Sub-Saharan Africa over time. By 2020, the cumulative amount received for countries from Sub-Saharan Africa, again, from those dedicated climate funds, multilateral climate funds that we track, was roughly 6 billion, which again is not that much, but it's a core and important part of the climate finance provision for Sub-Saharan Africa. So if you then look who in Africa receives the funding from the dedicated multilateral climate fund, we see that if you include North African countries, especially Egypt and Morocco, receiving a large share of the CFU-tracked climate finance, which is then total with the inclusion of basically Northern Africa, 7.25 billion. And it shows a clear difference in how much finance is received, with, for example, again, a couple of countries in Northern Africa and South Africa receiving more than other countries by far. However, and I think that's also important to point out, the multilateral climate funds have focused finance in least developed countries in Africa, Since 2003, 29 least developed countries have been supported with 3.8 billion from those dedicated climate funds, which represents 64% of the finance in the region overall. In 2020, so last year, the Green Climate Funds itself accounted for more than a quarter of cumulative project approvals for Sub-Saharan LDCs, so it's an important actor there. If you look then at the themes of the climate finance provision for Sub-Saharan Africa, and again, the progression over the several years that we did here from 2015 to 2020 for the last 6 years, you see that in contrast to other regions, adaptation is clearly the theme to which most funding is directed. However, still mitigation share is rather large, especially if you include RED Plus as well. So if you put basically the percentages for the red and the green lines together. And what you also see is that the numbers of projects and programs funded that are labeled as cross-cutting is significantly increasing. And cross-cutting sometimes can be a misnomer because very often it's largely mitigation with a very small amount of adaptation, but ideally it should really show a more comprehensive approach which unifies both mitigation and adaptation. So if you then look and the scale of the bubbles or the size of the bubbles indicates the scale of the financing provided by different climate funds for Sub-Saharan Africa. And again, it's dedicated climate funds. It's not everything in the climate finance universe. It's just a specific subset of actors. You can see that since the Green Climate Fund was fully operationalized in 2015, it took it only about 3 years to become the most important multilateral funder for Sub-Saharan Africa. And as I mentioned already, especially for African LDCs. And because of the allocation framework that the Green Climate Fund has, which stipulates a 50% allocation for adaptation and 50% of the adaptation allocation for SIDS LDCs in Africa, this is actually a very predictable thematic funding source in comparison to other funding providers. I wanted to point out, and you might say, what the heck does that have to do with finance provided for the African context? But I wanted to point out the relevancy for African climate finance, namely the recognition of the importance of gender-responsive climate finance and how that has grown. What you see here is basically a time progression over the last 10 years of not only how much the consideration of gender has grown in the UNFCCC, but also what has happened in the climate funds. And if you look at it, the GCF, so the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, which has the Least Developed Countries Fund and the Special Climate Change Fund, the Climate Investment Funds and the Adaptation Fund, which together cover 87% of the dedicated climate finance that is tracked by CFU for Sub-Saharan Africa, all have dedicated gender policies and gender action plans on the book, have committed to actually implement in a gender responsive way. I would say it's a goal. We are not there yet. It's a work in progress, but it's important that that policy commitment is there. What we see as a challenge, and I think one of our speakers will go into that, is that those climate funds remain largely inaccessible for women's organizations and gender groups and local communities, including from Africa, because there is very often the assumption of a trickle down. And actually IDFC members and MDBs are the ones to be challenged here to really make sure that the funding that they provide does focus also on some of the accessibility of the financing for women's groups and local groups and gender groups. Lastly, I want to just point out, and just as a theme, some of the trends that we are seeing regarding the gender responsiveness of climate finance. Those are not numbers specifically for Africa, but I think those are trends that also hold for Africa or are replicated in Africa. And what we see there is just a very minor percentage of 1.5% of the climate finance provided really sees gender equality as an equally important goal, as a main goal. Another third sees it as a somewhat related goal, but that means that for a full two-thirds, we either don't know or they don't include gender. And this is obviously something that needs to be improved. So this is my overview. With that, I thank you very much, and here are some links to some of the work and the resources that we provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's still so precise and complete. So it's a very good basis to have this discussion. And now I will give the floor to, I tried to be careful, Davina Millinge. That's right? That's right. She is the Principal Program Coordinator for the Climate Change and Green Growth Department in the African Development Bank. So happy to have you with us, and I give you the floor now on this issue.
Right. Well, sorry I was late. I actually got lost a couple of times.
Everybody.
And then somebody told me, just follow the red tapestry. I was like, oh, yeah, I got that. So, yeah, thank you so much. And really happy to represent the bank on this platform and to acknowledge our good relations with climate change. So just to say on this topic, indeed, let me first even voice the frustration of the continent that we represent, that there hasn't been progress on the finance stream in the negotiation. That is a big, when we left Africa, we had a lot of hope that there was going to be a step change. Today, no need. And for a continent that has almost less than 5% of emissions, for a continent that receives less than 5% of global climate finance, I think the Prime Minister of Barbados, put it right. It is immoral, and it's not sustainable. So back to what we do at the African Development Bank, I think we've been tracking our climate finance since 2011, jointly with other MDBs. So annually, there is a report that tracks what MDBs tag as climate finance through our portfolio. And so we've progressively moved since Paris in 2015 to where we are at now. Back then, we were at about 9% of our portfolio. To date, even with the COVID situation, we were at 32%, with a target of reaching 40%. But we all know that once COVID hit last year, we had a different focus of our resources going into emergency lending. And so with that, we still are on course to get to 40% of our portfolio. It's still not good enough, but it is ambitious. And we have put 25 billion on the table for 2020 to 2025 as a trajectory, which is tripling what we had in the previous years. And you also know that among MDBs, we have the highest percentage of financing for adaptation as a percentage of portfolio, which is currently at 62. But our target is at parity, 50-50. But of course, because of the continent that we operate in, adaptation is a priority, and it shows in our portfolio. That is on the numbers, but they say the devil is in the detail. Oftentimes, and why I speak the devil is in the detail, the source is the NDC. NDCs, from our indices that were submitted at COP to indices that were ratified to the improved NDC, there is a lack of MRVs, so there's no common tracking tools. to determine what is actually an NDC investment vis-a-vis what is in our portfolio as investment banks or even bilateral operations. And so there is need to harmonize these processes, especially in tracking the OECD numbers, the 100 billion. Because right now, you can't actually pinpoint what is in that cook pot called the 100 billion for OECD, because we don't have standards around the tracking. We as MDBs have our own methodologies that we have refined over the 10 years, but that is reflective of us as MDBs. There has to be a party process on tracking these issues, on tracking this finance. And I think that will give clarity, especially going into the stocktake in 2023, that we can track through NDCs what these investments are. At the African Development Bank, we host what we call the Africa NDC Hub that is built around 3 pillars. One on long-term actions that is meant to do revision of NDCs, LTSs, and NAPs around the 2050 trajectory. But high on that is also the means of implementation on finance, which is critical skills and technology transfer. Then the third one is on strategic partnerships, which the hub is really about. So the hub has 21 member institutions to try and speak the same language, because we all have strategies on climate action. We have bilateral or cooperation arrangements, and these things don't often speak together. And we are investing, so sometimes we duplicate effort because we didn't plan together. So the intention of the hub is at least to know what is in the other's pipeline that we can add on or co-finance with. That's how we operate within the NDC hub. So that hub has, for its action plan 2021-2025, is for 2022 to try and open up the NDCs and try to see which actions, because often you hear that Africa and NDC are a 3 trillion investment opportunity, but if you're private sector today and you have money, you'd have difficulty trying to see that opportunity and how to structure it for a financial institution to work with. And so we are still, we have NDCs here, but we still invest in our traditional way that we have a country envelope, and unless it fits in that cooperation with the country, it's not counted in. And so those are some of the issues that we have to deal with on the discourse. But let me say that we are, besides the lack of progress on climate finance, there has been traction on other, maybe not negotiation streams, other alliances and global coalitions that give us confidence that at least there's pressure, maybe through civil engagement, that is driving demand and consumption. One is on, I think it was 2 days ago, there was an announcement by the fashion industry. These were outliers, so many, even at COP21, that the fashion industry, you're now today seeing a statement article from the financial industry. If you walk down, I think somewhere here, there is a race car. And so that shows you where money is moving. And as a financial institution, we tend to read those trade winds and know that, okay, there is sustainability finance that we now need to know how to structure for our operations, because until we are able to package them, their products, because in Africa, what you find is when you talk to countries, we have all these projects, but we don't have finance. You talk to the finances, like, I'm looking for projects, I don't see them. And that is always the difficult. And what the problem is, indeed, there is no middle ground. There is no project designers or the capacities. That business stream, actually, if you're somebody looking for a business stream, that is a ready market right there. Because at the bank, we sit and wait for a ready project. the country is seated waiting for somebody to come. And so there's a missing chain there that I think is a good market segment that has to be filled. And so I will end by saying that we've just launched our climate change and green growth strategy for 10 years. That includes, of course, mitigation, because this is a continent that still has 80% of its infrastructure to be developed. And so there's a huge potential for sustainable infrastructure that needs to be factored in. We are still the continent that is going to be growing by 2050, so the labor force has to be catered for. We have mega cities around the coastal regions that need to be factored in. So there's a huge potential that if captured and designed, there is opportunities for moving finance. On the other side of the spectrum, you have all these collisions for net zero alliances. The Glasgow net zero alliance is like 130 trillion they announced the other day. And so what you see is that there is eventually that collision, because they're announcing targets, are going to be looking for emerging markets. And so what we've done at the bank is to try and engage the financial sector to see this headwind, if I might call it, in terms of resources that need to be de-risked for blended financing, and even to price the risk right, because oftentimes external finance, for lack of information, have a perception of risk that is overrated for the continent. So the domestic financial institutions, what we are doing in an initiative called the Africa Financial Alliance on Climate Change is to bring that conversation to the financial sector to begin, first of all, get involved in the global alliances, the collisions. You will barely find us in the net zero, the networking of the greening of the financial sector. You will barely find us in the net zero alliances for banking and for insurance. And so the idea is, let's get onto the table before we become the bill. And so lastly, yes, we have our long-term strategy, our 10-year strategy, that is built on mitigation, adaptation, finance, and enabling environment. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to ask you two questions. The first one is about gender, because we saw that it was a big problem. What is your the position on, and what a bank like you can do on this issue? The second one is before the next people on local authority, but first on gender.
Right, yes, and I was intrigued by her presentation on gender. Indeed, you know, the new rule that if you don't have a gender balance, people don't go on your panel, so you've done very well. And it is through pressure like that that you get things done. And so at the bank, we now have a gender marker through our whole portfolio. You will not take a project to board unless it has passed that gender screening. So the gender marker is part of our safeguards. And so that is at the bank level. Our operations are all gender screened. But besides that, you're talking about the CIF's work on gender. We have analytics tools for mainstreaming gender in energy operations that we are co-financing or co-partnering with the CIF in that regard. And we have operations in Rwanda, in Kenya, in the East Africa region around that. We also have, with the GCF, a dedicated credit line for women in SMEs, for women for resilient agriculture. We've started with the EcoBank in Ghana with a credit line for that. And so with that, we want to scale up those initiatives. But I was talking about fashion. We also have a program, a program called Fashionomics, because textiles is a big employer on the continent. And so sustainability around the dyeing, circular processes of the textile industry is a big action point in the Fashionomics program. Yeah.
Okay, and the second one
yes.
question is about, we as climate change, we work a lot with local authority in Africa, with UCLG and all the networks. And a lot of times we are just one thing. We want direct financing for the local authority from the banks and the financial sector. And it's impossible, and we have done no progress since 10 years since Paris. So what is your feeling about that? And what are you able to do concretely?
Right. So let me say UCLG Africa is a member of the Africa NDC Hub. Two is they've worked around local indices, like localizing indices. This is a big one. It is a big effort that, and indices are actions on the ground. They are not actions at the planning ministry. Ultimately, the local leader has to understand what that means. And so the local authorities to have done that effort to mainstream indices to the local level is a step in the right direction. The next thing is on designing investment plans as indices. Oftentimes, we kind of try to separate indices, separate from SDGs and the local actions. I'll speak as a Rwandan. We have, I think, a Rwandan on the panel. And Rwanda has a decentralized planning called Imihigo. Those are KPIs at a local level. Now, those KPIs have climate markers on them. They have adaptation elements, and I think they have actually have an indication that you must have a climate target on your IMHIGO, the local authorities. He'll speak more about it, I guess. But that's the kind of effort that we want to see, because ultimately, when we invest, we do EADs. We do climate engagement where the local authorities are. But you rightly say, where is the investment that is directed to local government? Of course, local government are not entities that you guarantee that you have a sovereign guarantee with. Some municipalities do and have created green bonds. And that's the work, that's the journey that we still need to cover. That if Durban can issue a municipal bond, why can't Kigali do the same, or Masaka, or any other municipality? That is the homework that still needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. And now we will have the point of view of local authority. So I'm very happy to have you on board. Mr. Ladislas Nengadaimana, I hope I didn't make a mistake, General Secretary of Rwanda Association of Local Government Authority, RALGA. We were in 2019 as Climate Change Summit in Ghana, and you have the floor on this issue and the point of view of local authority.
Thank you very much. Let me first thank Climate Change for having invited me to be on this panel, and have been in partnership for quite 3 to 4 years now. In terms of climate change, the question to me was the point of view or the feedback from the local authorities in Africa. And it is difficult to talk of the feedback of local authorities in Africa because Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent with more than 54 countries, and each country has its governance system. But the responsibilities of the governments, they apply across. We know their responsibilities, and we also know the responsibilities of the local government or the local authorities. These responsibilities are mainly about people, about socio-economic development, and about stability. And when we talk of stability, we also mean sustainability. And climate change is a threat. It is a global threat. It is not only localized to Africa, it is a global threat. But local authorities, if I give an example, local authorities, they're like a mother who knows all the babies, where they are sleeping, and what they want, what they need. But the challenge of local authorities in Africa is that it is this mother who mainly knows the needs of the babies and lacks means or resources to address these wants and these needs. When it goes to climate change, Africa, we are at the receiving end as victims. The change, the global warming, when we talk of net zero, it is mainly about from the United States of America, from China, from Europe. These countries are emitting gases, and Africa has no control about that. Particularly local authorities, we are like those mothers, local there, on the ground, waiting from the sky what is happening. So I think we should be talking about that. The fact that climate finance is being offered in the form of loans is not sustainable. It is not sustainable for two reasons. One, climate change cannot be localized. Climate change is global, but loans are localized. You get a loan, you pay back. But the effect of climate change is global. That is one. Second, climate finance should be a shared responsibility, not a localized responsibility for Africa to receive loans to finance climate, and in the end, these big powers keep damaging and emitting gases. We should look at prevention, adaptation, but also mitigation is very, very important. Local authorities in Africa, if I talk from my perspective as the Secretary General of the Rwanda Association of Local Government Authorities, I would say that indeed there is no size-fits-all in the governance system, but the governance system in Rwanda is a decentralized model, whereby the central government has the responsibility to define policies, to mobilize resources, to provide the capacity, and to monitor how the policies are implemented. And the local government are responsible for implementation and designing development strategies which are localized. And in the end, these strategies are implemented. The financing model is shared between the local authorities and the central government. In Rwanda, we are not complaining about government not financing local government, but in terms of climate, there is an imbalance in government financing. Resources are limited, but the threat goes at a higher speed than goes the resources. So we should be looking at this in a global perspective, how to ensure sustainability in development and rationalization in spending, but the global powers should meet their commitment in providing resources to finance climate. That is what I would say, one. Second, on the ground there, the government in Rwanda, we have the local authorities who are the mayors leading the districts. And every year they sign the performance contracts with the President of the Republic. And at the end, there is an annual performance evaluation. The best performers are rewarded and the least performers are blamed. So that is the accountability model in our country, Rwanda. And these district development strategies mainstream the SDGs and the NDCs. We have the localization of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have the localization of the nationally determined contributions. And our association, Rariga, we support the district in ensuring that these priorities are equally and fairly mainstreamed, implemented, and achieved for the good of the people. But we should understand that climate change is a shared responsibility. Climate finance should be a shared responsibility, not providing loans to finance climate, because in the end you get loans, but as the climate keeps changing, in the end you shall not get means to pay back the loans. We should look at it in a global perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, alors, we have the next speakers. Non, c'est vous qui parlez. Peut-être, vous pouvez peut-être laisser la place. Could you give the floor to the next speaker? Okay. Oh, okay. No, it's okay. Only one. Oh, it's okay. We got the gender balance. That's thank you. We save the gender balance. Thank you. You know. Okay. So thank you so much to be here. I don't speak in French to a French guy. So sorry, but now we have the point of view and. Of Mr. François-Xavier Duporge, qui est, alors je le dis en français comme ça, qui est responsable adjoint de la division climat à l'Agence française de développement. In English, it's a deputy head of the French of the climate change division in the French Development Agency. So we work a lot climate change with you, even in Africa, even in anywhere. And we know that as a development agency like the others from Germany, from Spain, especially we work with both of them. We try to have with the financial bank to have people working together. On this issue, and so we are very happy to have you with us and to hear you about what you are doing in Africa.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I think this is the sign of the strong partnership between our two institutions. AFD is very happy to work with climate change in the promotion of the role of non-state actors in the climate action. I will start first by saying a few words on AFD strategy, climate strategy. We have been quite ambitious and willing to be at the forefront on climate change for the past 15 years now. And the first milestone was our 2012 strategy, where we committed to provide 50% of our annual commitments to climate finance. And this has been achieved every year since then. And so, for example, in 2020, we have been able to commit 5.2 billion euros in climate finance. And as Davina was mentioning, it was in times of COVID, so that was quite an achievement. And we could see that actually mitigation amounts decreased a little bit and adaptation was stronger, proportionally. So that meant something. That was something to think about. And a second milestone in our ambition towards climate action is the in 2017 the new strategy decided to embark a commitment on being 100% aligned with the Paris Agreement. That is to say, from that date, we decided not to finance any projects that would not be aligned with Paris Agreement. So that and again, we were one of the very few public development banks to take this commitment. now I think so. I will focus my talk on the role of non-state actors, as climate change is about that. If you agree, Bernard. But I would like actually to use a very strong statement made by Davina in her intervention, saying that actually there was a missing link between those development banks saying that there is no project to be financed, and the local actors saying, well, there is a lack of financial resources. And so we have tried to actually address this this deficit in this lack of missing of middle ground, and we have tried to address that through two instruments. One is adaptation, and actually the program director is here with us, Christophe Buffet. And the other one is CICLIA, so a program focusing on supporting local governments, cities, in their climate action. And so I will be very brief, but adaptation, it's a 30 million grant program and supports 15 countries and regional organizations in the Caribbean and Africa. So it's mainly providing support in terms of climate governance and capacity building at the institutional level, public policies, and third, helping build a pipe of adaptation projects that can go on scale. So adaptation has delivered on the financial leverage, because now we can see that 584 million euros have been already approved in terms of new financing at scale of adaptation projects, benefiting from the feasibility studies that were supported by AdaptAction. So again, this missing link being provided through the support. And we are anticipating that the total of financing that will be actually leveraged should be above 1 billion euros. Second instrument is CICLIA. So this is a program of 12 million euro grants, and it is focusing on Sub-Saharan African cities. And so it has also the ambition of having a financial leverage, and they are estimating to 800 million euro of financing being leveraged through their supports. I will give you just a few examples. So support to Abidjan and Yaoundé in terms of public transportation planning. There is also a support on waste, on the management of solid waste in Lomé and Conakry. And in terms of adaptation, a big issue is how to actually improve the drainage system in order to handle the flooding problems in cities. And so there are supports to Bangui and Kinshasa ongoing. Madagascar, CICLIA is also supporting Madagascar cities on urban planning. So I would like to finish my presentation by talking about another way of providing support to local governments in Africa in being more concrete in their climate action. And this is the one on what we call in French coopération décentralisée. I don't think it looks nice in English, but this is actually peer-to-peer cooperation. And we believe that this is also a very strong leverage. So that means that a French city and an African city sit together and try to work together. We believe that this is very relevant. So AFD has with the support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France, we have a financing window of currently 9 million euro yearly, and it's going to increase to 12 million euro. And we believe that this is very relevant because actually those mayors, French cities, do face exactly the same challenges, especially to convince their people that this is really relevant to invest in those actions. So we are talking to Cités Unies France also to see how we can increase the focus on climate action of this financial window in the future.
Thank you, thank you. Just a personal word, more, because I was more than 30 years elected, and especially vice president of my region, a large French region, the second largest region in France, and we had a lot of link, what we call in French coopération décentralisée, with African country, and especially with regions in Africa. And my feeling about what you said right now is that the most important is not to give money from our region. We are not made for that. It's your work. But what we can do is help in a capacity building, and that's. I worked 10 years on this issue with region of Saint-Louis in Senegal, in Burkina, and also, and I think it's the best way to do that. It's to help on capacity building. That's my conclusion. We put too much money directly. It's and when I was in charge, I was wondering why we put so much money on this program or not on this, but not enough on the essentials that a local authority can give. Its capacity building, help to training, and that's, I think, the most important. I think now we have someone in Visio. Maybe we will have some time after to exchange between you, but I would like to give the floor to Zainabou Zegda from the... Do you have... That's okay? Is she... Oh, okay. Zainabou Zegda. Maybe she could introduce directly. Okay, Zainabou. You have the floor. Okay, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very sorry to be not part of this COP this year, but I'm happy to do that remotely. So I think I have my presentation, yeah, okay. Okay, so I would like to get my presentation from gender perspective and how we can boost the access to finance and the resilience in Africa. And I'm happy that Lion, my colleague and champion, is there. She talked about gender finance. So I would like to show how we are doing locally and at national level to improve access to finance by women. So I don't know who is pushing the computer. Yeah, okay. If you can see here, Women Environmental Program Burkina is a national NGO in Burkina, and we are doing our best to participate to the fight to climate change with agroecology, please, if you can, yeah, make it wide. Yeah, resilience, promotion of local food, circular economy, and green. We lately have implemented a Swift Africa Green Project and have introduced RSCP, research efficiency and cleaner production through industrial symbiosis. We can see how women are working here through production to process and commercialization of food and forestry and also pastoral product. Please, can we move? Yeah, even, we also implementing on supporting women in recycling with some challenge in all this activity, low cost option, need of finance and technology for transition to the energy and clean energy. Please. Okay. To talk about energy and clean and sustainable energy need, if I take example in Burkina Faso, almost all households use firewood for cooking, around 88%. This proportion varies from 64 in urban area to 95 in rural areas. In more than 8 over 10 households, wood is the main fuel used for cooking, and in the rural 9 over 10 cover, it is collected by women. I'm not seeing very well this. The same sources of energy is used for processing many items, rice, millet, and corn, flour, sesame, palm, and groundnut oil, fonio, peanut, shea butter, clichy, cashew, mustard, ginger or bissap juice, wine, cheese, etc., and even for recycling. Yeah, we, through our training with local MSMEs, they use alternative source of energy like solar panel, solar dryer, and also LED light to replace the traditional light, who is consuming a lot of energy. Again, yeah, we also train people to use the waste byproduct like cashew nuts to make fire and replace wood. Again, this is also a groundnut shell, who is what it can be used naturally like this, and also transformed to the briquette for and replacing firewood. This is also another alternative, paper or carton waste, which are used like a briquette to replace wood. What is really efficient and is working in our countries? I know most of you know about platform, multifunctional platform. It's a system with some machine. It can be solar, it can be with fossil, but the solar one is the best way now, according to the terms. And this is very useful for communities, for household to process food for household and for market. We can grind the cereal and all goods. And they can also charge refill battery with through this system. And it is very important. Now to talk about gender-just climate finance. We really, I think we jumped another file. Please come back.
Oh. I try.
Yeah, and I see it's very tight. I don't know, it's difficult to read by me, but even if I write that, so the gender-just climate finance.
We can read it. Sorry, we can read it clearly from here.
No, it is not too clear. But
no, for us it's clear.
Yeah. Okay.
We can read it easily.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I should perhaps open mine.
We are reading.
Yeah,
don't worry.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Maybe we read, so...
Yeah. Just a second. Yeah, okay. What about gender-just climate finance? It's a project by Widow and Bof-N. As overview, you can say that about 80% of population in Sub-Saharan is involved in agroforestry and pastoral sector, while 70% of them are women through the valuation of the sector. And you know that this sector is very vulnerable. Among impact we have heat, degradation of land and forests. Women strive to find and implement different solutions and innovation to cope with the change. But they need help to ensure that these innovations are put into place quickly enough to deal with growing climate risk. Most of the time, they have to struggle to have the credit and access little finance of both local and national level. We can say that the lack of finance is a barrier for women, and to access finance and cope loss and damage caused by climate change. What are we doing in gender-just climate finance? What we need is to adapt a finance mechanism. The urgent need of specific finance mechanism for women for reason of social equity. You know, social barriers are keeping women in recurrent poverty as no inheritance or guarantee. And for climate justice, vulnerable women or anyone else in Africa should not go into debt to adapt to climate change or participate in the global mitigation effort. So it is important the politic and other government see the necessity to invest in adaptation, in resilience, the activity of women. Very few are done, and we are still far from the mark. I appreciate the lady of IFDB talking about, and I have this case here noted, the case of our program, but we're still looking for a better to do. They have, with EcoBank, permit to 400 women entrepreneurs in agro-food sector to finance the climate resilience activity. But the remain is a lot. Finally, as in my mandate as a gender monitor, we are trying to contribute to the access of women to climate finance. For example, in 2013-14, only 80% of climate-related energy aid targeted gender equality. In 2014, only 2% of all gender-sensitive climate assistance went to civil society organizations in South, amounting to $123 million. Women's rights activity and civil society organizations are increasingly receiving information about the proposal being developed. And this information often depends on the relationship with the organization concerned. What we are ambitioning to have is the ultimate goal is to end this mechanism of receiving information and occasional consultation and become a collaborator to identify and develop opportunity that will meet the need of affected communities, including women. As conclusion, the will and the strong commitment of our policy are lacking, not only to adapt, but to participate in the mitigation effort. For example, supporting the most vulnerable for transition to clean and sustainable energy. Adaptation technique and technology to produce food and energy to secure the production. In this context of climate change, the prerequisite is to build the resilience of people and ecosystem. By doing so, we are fighting climate change. I thank you so much.
Thank you. That's very concrete. Thank you. Okay, so we just have a few minutes to go, and I ask you if someone wants to have a question or a reaction on what would have been said here. I'm looking. Yes, Jan, go.
If there are no questions, I certainly have a couple of reactions. First of all, Zenabu, thank you very much for coming in. I think it's important by rounding it out with Zenabu's contribution to again put into context that non-state actors are not just local governments, but are local communities, are marginalized groups like women, like indigenous people, a lot of which don't necessarily get a lot of attention in climate finance and climate finance provision. And I also liked very much that she highlighted, as our colleague from the Rwandan communities did, that there is a challenge in the provision of climate finance in the form of loans. And if I can come to you, you mentioned the climate finance that Afd has provided, but it would be really interesting to learn what the percentage of grant versus loan financing is, and then particularly the ideas of focusing grant provision towards local sector participation and accessibility. So for example, I think the challenge is for those that can access finance, and that includes, for example, the Afd and the African Development Bank, including in multilateral climate funds like the Green Climate Fund, to actually share the wealth, share the ability to access by trying to find ways how in their programs they could integrate the finance provision for local communities and particularly for local groups, including women and other groups, much more for and center and not necessarily as an afterthought. So for example, it has never been clear to me, and I just pose it as a challenge, why in a, let's say, a 40 million plus or larger program that any of your entities might have with the fund like the Green Climate Fund, which is a multiple component program or project, why it is not possible to put, let's say, 5 million aside and program that through a small grants provision specialized and focused on engagement of really local actors. And that could be civil society or could be local communities, for them to actually pick up and prioritize some of their needs in climate implementation. And I hear very often that this is obviously a question of the transaction costs, but I think if we want to look at the effectiveness of climate finance, we need to get away from just the focus of cost efficiency, but looking at the overall effectiveness of financing provided. So would be very curious to hear some reaction to that. Thank you.
Do you want to react? Yes, that could be very interesting.
Yeah, I could react on the decentralized systems, but I think the first question was for AFD. Yeah. So on the decentralized systems, I think we start with who's the signatories. So for countries, I'll give an example of Kenya that has decentralized budgeting systems that actually track climate finance to the local level. Because those structures exist, in most countries you'll actually find that there's no decentralized systems as structures, even for budgeting and actions. For those countries that have gone through the effort, there is a trail of what finance is coming in, even if the entity that is legally represented in our institution and with the GCF board is the central government, but at least you can track where finance went. So one, the structure has to be created, and two, which is a responsibility or my call to action for audiences like climate change or the networks that climate change is, there is need to steamroll concessional financing. One, I think you mentioned issues around what is your portfolio in terms of debt, and yeah, it is huge. And so as we tag climate finance as, and I think even Zainab noted it, that when you look at our climate finance, a lot of it's a loan book. And that has to change because the 100 billion that we are very annoyed about is new concessional financing, but it's not coming as that. And because it's not happening like that, what is, as we say, we are increasing climate financing, we are increasing debt in sustainability. And so that has to be re-engineered. How? There is thinking around debt to climate swaps. Those are new instruments that could be brought on board. There is the IMF special drawing rights, the big billions, 650 allocated by the size of their shareholding. And as the argument goes, actually those allocated, the big shares, don't actually need them. They're already doing fine with the COVID stimulus programs. The pressure or the push should be through your networks as climate chance to have a relocation that unblocks that concessional financing. And of course, the opposition has been, even if you did it, the structure isn't there. Let's start by that and create the structure, because once the finance is there, it's always easy to create the structures, because we have the African Development Bank that is 60 years old on the continent, so I don't know which other structure you need. And so it is by, first of all, let's get the balance sheet ready. One thing I can point out that I think we count as a positive in this scope was the UK's room to run guarantees. Of course, it's a guarantee, but it kind of eases our balance sheet in terms of doing more, and it's tagged to climate. So it is having those, pushing the envelope in that direction, looking for new facilities that can offset the balance book, the credit liquidity constraint of these countries, especially post-COP. You know, post-COVID. The COVID situation triggered the first recession on the continent in the last 21 years. That is huge. So countries have gone way back in terms of the ability to manage loans. So there's something to do about the liquidity situation on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, thank you to give us our roadmap. We need it. Thanks. And now I turn to the AFD and react also, if you can.
Well, thank you for those questions.
That would be the closing word.
Oh, okay. So I will try to be brief. Sorry, I don't have the number. I know it's very, very low, as you know. And that's the reason why we try to make the best use out of these scarce resources. And we've been talking about adaptation. We've been talking about CICLIA. I could also talk about the 2050 facility, which is actually supporting 30 countries to develop their long-term strategy, which is a key issue. That is to say, how countries can be helped to actually develop their long-term vision of what is a low-carbon, resilient, and inclusive development pathway. So this is, okay, we have scarce resources, so we try to use them as strategy as possible. I would like still to mention a ground program targeting NGOs from Africa, from the French Facility for Global Environment, and it's a program that has been working for the past 12 years now, and there were like over 200 NGOs supported by this program in climate action, biodiversity, and so it's really on the ground, and it's really helping those NGOs to grow. So they are being trained financially, technically, how to prepare a financing request to bigger funds, and so this has been a key concern for the French global the FFM. If you want to have more information on that, because PPI, FFM. And we have done a capitalization of all the work done. It's a small grant program, but run with the use of actually, I don't remember now if it's CI or another international NGOs. But and one last word is that actually gender and climate is really a key issue for us now. We are tracking the percentage of our climate finance which is gender sensitive. I think the numbers for 2020 was 60%. So this is okay, but I think we can do much more. Okay, I think it starts by actually talking to colleagues who are running the different operational programs. And we had a discussion yesterday in a pub, drinking, and we were talking about to our colleague who is running the 2050 facility, so long-term strategy, and said, come on, macroeconomic modeling study, you can't actually include gender. It has nothing to do. And we were telling him, yes, it can. It should be in the terms of reference. And you will see it will tell you a story. So that would be my humble conclusion, is that if there is a will, there is a way to include gender everywhere it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really think like you, and I'm sure, even in my experience in Africa, it's more efficiency in that way than another one. So it's really what we saw with Zenabu. We saw that you made real things on the ground, and it's more efficient than a lot of speech sometimes. Okay, thank you all, and we were very happy to have that, and we know each other so well that we are sure that we will work together for a long time. And maybe we will have this summit in Dakar, and now we hope, with this crazy pandemic, we still hope that we will be in Rio, in Dakar next September. And we hope that we will be together and with a lot of people and able to meet really and not only virtually. Thank you so much all, and see you a lot of times during this COP and next. So, okay, thank you, bye.